Facing the Giant, Part 1. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand. 1 Samuel 17:40. Do you need to be born into a royal family to be a king? Well, not when God is in charge. A long time ago, there was a young shepherd named David that God chose to become the king of Israel. God wanted to prove that he had picked the right man for the job. Before David became king, he faced many tests and had many exciting adventures. Around this time, Israel had a disobedient king named Saul. Saul had won many battles, but he stopped listening to God. One day, his army defeated a fierce enemy, the bloodthirsty Amalekites. Instead of destroying all of the people and animals like God had told him, Saul kept the best sheep and cattle for himself. "Save the king of Amalek," Saul said to his soldiers. "Let's keep him as our prisoner." God was very unhappy with Saul's behavior. He knew that if Saul saved the people and animals, the Amalekites would attack the Israelites again. He wanted obedience, so he spoke to his prophet, Samuel. "I am sorry that I made Saul king," God told Samuel. "He has turned away from me and disobeyed my commands. It is time for a new king of Israel." Samuel knew that God was serious. He knew God would take away the kingdom from Saul. Samuel covered his face and wept. "Samuel, stop crying over Saul," said God. "Get some olive oil and go to Bethlehem. And when you get there, find a man called Jesse. I have chosen one of his sons to be the next king." But Samuel was worried. If Saul finds I'm looking for a new king, he'll kill me. Samuel may have been an important prophet, but Saul was still a powerful king. "Do not worry," God told him. "Take a calf with you and say you're there to offer a sacrifice to me. Invite Jesse to the meal, and I will show you what to do next." Samuel was an obedient prophet, and he made his way quickly to Bethlehem. As he reached the gates of Bethlehem, the city leaders rushed out to greet him. "Why are you here?" they asked, their hands shaking. Have you come in peace?" They had good reason to be nervous. Samuel wasn't just a prophet. He was also a judge and an army commander. The people knew not to mess with Samuel. "Don't be afraid," Samuel told the men. "I've come to offer a sacrifice to God. Get ready and join me for the meal." Samuel invited Jesse and his sons to the sacrifice. "God will choose the next king of Israel from among your sons," he told Jesse privately. When Jesse and his sons arrived, Samuel looked at Eliab, the oldest brother. This man is tall and handsome, and he looks like a king, thought Samuel. He must be the man that God has chosen. But God had other ideas. "Ignore how good-looking Eliab is," said God. "He is not the next king. I don't look at the outside of a person. I look at their heart." One by one, Jesse brought his sons into the courtyard to show Samuel. But each time, God said no. "God hasn't chosen any of these 7 men," said Samuel, shaking his head. "Do you have any other sons?" "My youngest son, David, is taking care of the sheep," said Jesse, pointing to the rocky hillside nearby. "How could he be a king?" Samuel saw David through the window, and he smiled. He knew this was the man God had chosen to be the next king of Israel. "Tell him to come and see me," said Samuel excitedly. "We will eat when he arrives." David scrambled down the rocky path and rushed into the house to greet Samuel. He was very strong and handsome, with short red hair and a twinkle in his eye. "Samuel, stand up and anoint him," said God. "He is the one." Samuel took his horn of olive oil and poured it carefully over David's head to show he would be the next king of Israel. Immediately, the Spirit of God came on David. Jesse's sons frowned at each other. They didn't know what to think. Why had their youngest brother been anointed king and not one of them? Samuel didn't give them any answers. His job was done. Israel had its new king. Part 2. Because King Saul had been disobedient, the Spirit of God left him. Instead, an evil spirit entered Saul and troubled him day and night. Nothing seemed to calm Saul's mind. His servants paced back and forth, wondering what to do. "Let's find someone who can play the harp," they suggested. "Maybe the music will help you rest." Saul shrugged his shoulders. He didn't know why this evil spirit had come upon him. "One of Jesse's sons in Bethlehem knows how to play the harp," continued his servants. "He's a brave man who loves God. His name is David." Saul sent a message to Jesse. "Send me your son David, the one who plays the harp." Jesse sent David to the royal palace right away. After all, you couldn't say no to the king of Israel. From that day on, whenever the evil spirit entered Saul, David would sit beside the king and play his harp. Not far away, the mighty Philistine army sharpened their swords. Nobody liked the Philistines. They were mean and cruel, and they liked a good fight. Saul knew the Philistines hated the Israelites, and it made him nervous. He gathered his soldiers together and quickly prepared for battle. The Israelites didn't know it yet, but the Philistines had a fearsome warrior on their side. His name was Goliath, and he was as tall as a house. Everyone feared him, and nobody came near him. Goliath knew he was stronger than any man in Israel.
"Why are you here, you tiny Israelites?"
roared Goliath, flexing his bulging muscles.
"If you dare, pick one of your men to fight me. If he wins, we will be your slaves. But if I win, you will be our slaves."
Saul and his men shook with fear. They weren't used to fighting anyone as big as Goliath. Even the ground trembled when he walked. Meanwhile, in Bethlehem, Jesse told David to visit his brothers who were soldiers in Saul's army. "Take this bread and cheese and go to the Elah Valley," he said. "Find out if your brothers are well, and then come back and tell me." Early the next morning, David jumped out of bed, grabbed the sack of food, and set out to do as his father had ordered. He arrived at the edge of the camp just as the soldiers were marching out to battle. David dropped his sack and raced to the battle line to greet his three brothers. He had never been so close to the enemy, and he was excited. He folded his arms and glared at the Philistines. How dare they try to destroy the Israelites?
"Why are you lined up for battle?"
Goliath snarled, baring his teeth. He'd been threatening the Israelites for 40 days, and he was growing impatient.
"Come and fight me, you cowards."
The Israelites should have been used to hearing Goliath's threats, but they were still terrified. Even King Saul's knees knocked with fear. "That giant is a monster!" the soldiers cried, running back to the camp. "If we could only kill him, we could get the reward the king promised." David turned to stare at the soldiers. "What's the reward for killing Goliath?" he asked. "Besides, who is this Philistine that he dares to challenge the army of the living God?" The soldiers told him about Goliath's challenge. Then they told him what Saul had promised to the man who killed Goliath. "The king will give you his daughter to marry and will treat your family well." David smiled. He liked the sound of the king's reward. "Why are you here, you wimp?" said Eliab, poking David in the chest with his spear. "You should be taking care of the sheep. You're not a warrior. You've only come to watch the fighting." "What have I done now?" asked David, turning back to the soldiers. "I only asked a question." He ignored his older brother and continued talking with the men. In his heart, he wanted to help save Israel from the Philistines. When King Saul heard about David's bravery, he called David before him. David told the king, "No one should be afraid of this Philistine. I will go and fight him." "How can you fight him?" replied Saul, looking David up and down. "He's a great warrior, and you're only a young boy." "I have killed lions and bears to protect my father's sheep," said David. "God will help me kill this giant too. Just wait and see." King Saul sighed and scratched his beard. He wasn't sure how to deal with Goliath. Could David be the answer? Part 3. "Okay," Saul finally said to David. "Go, fight the giant, and may our God be with you." He put a bronze helmet on David's head and gave him a coat of armor to wear. David's heart pumped a little faster. He grabbed a spear and walked towards the battlefield, but he didn't get very far. I can't wear all this armor. It's too big and heavy." He ripped off the bronze helmet and gave the armor back to Saul. "Don't worry, I have another plan." David knew that Goliath had 4 nasty sons. Holding his shepherd's stick, he picked 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream and shoved them in his pocket. Now, he was ready for battle. With his sling in his hand, David strolled towards Goliath. Goliath had waited for 40 days, and he was ready to fight.
Am I a mad dog? Is that why you're carrying a stick?
Laughed Goliath.
Why don't you Israelites give me a real soldier to fight?
David slowly twirled his empty sling and waited.
Come closer,
he challenged David.
I'll give your body to the birds and animals to eat.
David looked Goliath straight in the eye. You come against me with a sword and a spear, said David, but you don't scare me. I come against you in the name of the Lord, the God of this army. Goliath nearly choked. How dare this Israelite boy threaten him? But David hadn't finished. Today, God will hand you over to me. I'm going to kill you and give the bodies of the Philistines to the birds and animals. Then the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. Goliath had heard enough. He raised his spear and stomped towards David. Clouds of dust rose with each step the giant made, but David wasn't afraid. He grabbed a stone from his bag, put it in his sling, and swung it above his head. David aimed at the giant and let it fly. The stone whizzed through the air like a rocket and smacked Goliath in the middle of his huge, hairy forehead. Goliath stumbled forward and crashed to the ground. David had killed the mighty Philistine with just a sling and a stone. The soldiers stood and stared in astonishment. They couldn't believe the young shepherd had just killed their great giant. David stood over his enemy. "Now, do you believe me?" he said, looking down at Goliath's limp body. He pulled out the Philistine's sword and chopped off his head. God has given Goliath into our hands. The Israelite army cheered. When the Philistines saw their hero was dead, they turned and ran away as fast as they could. But the Israelites didn't let them escape so easily. They grabbed their weapons and chased the Philistine soldiers all the way back to their homes. David hadn't forgotten about Goliath's head. He tucked it under his arm and carried it back to Jerusalem. Saul was very pleased with David. "From now on, you work for me," he said, placing a hand on David's shoulder. "You're a soldier, not a shepherd." Israel sang and danced and played their tambourines. This victory proved God was with them. They had defeated the mighty Philistines.